Welcome back to Sheffield Live. You are watching African Voices with me, Bailo Jallo. Earlier, we were discussing about knife crime, but moving on Khartoum, many people don't know that your academic background, you came from a research background, because including me, I only knew that a couple of hours back before we got into the studio. So talk me through what you did in university, and prior to you getting into university, how was life like? Because I understand you moved from London to Sheffield.
Yes, my background in terms of is social science, so basically more of a sociology, social anthropology, and education. I went to a college called Ruskin College, which is in Oxford, and I did sociology there. Moved on to Sussex University in Brighton, where I did social anthropology for my bachelor's, and I did honours degree there with development studies. And when you're young and you do development studies and you were born in Africa, you think you're actually going to go and kind of developed everything. So there I was interested in actually in inequalities in terms of research. My BA research and my master's, so before I got to my master's, was tackling and talking about FGM.
Wow.
So you can imagine, I'm coming up with feminism and anthropology, and with all the topics of anthropology, I picked feminism and anthropology to do my thesis, to talk about feminism and FGM. And that took me to, which is actually needs to be published, I still have it, which tackled a lot of the issues of who's got the right to talk about FGM at that time. But a few years later, my first ever job in terms of research I'd never thought I would actually do microeconomics research, but it was a conference and it was a research assistant, and I got really interested in talking about the issues of basically basic livelihoods in back home in Somalia, and and where I was growing up in London, and kind of seeing the difference where there's a lot of poor people who are not really having their everyday the things that they would like. I've always wanted to do educational research in that and tackle the issues of education. And about 5 years ago, when I was pregnant with one of my children, I did my master's at Sheffield University, and I did education, globalizing education policy and practice. So basically, global education policy, and also how it looks in practice. In that, in between my master's and my BA, moving to Sheffield, the reason I moved to Sheffield was I was research associate at the University of Sheffield, tackling, and basically, it was a needs assessment to see the needs of visually impaired and blind Somali people, so migrant communities. How are they reaching their health services? How are disabled people reaching services, especially migrant communities? And that kind of moved me to do housing research. So I did housing pathways for immigrants research, which are both published. Okay. And then it kind of takes me to my thinking I still want to continue. So in all of that, I've always been working in research. There was 3 years that I actually thought I should do more practical things, and I worked at the voluntary sector as a planning and partnership development officer. And I'm still thinking I should do my research. So I finally did it 5 years ago. And in my thesis, my research was autism. It was the knowledge, what knowledge it was specifically for Somali community issues, but it tackles the whole section of how communities or people are not really reaching the services. And I have a lot to say about how autism is being dealt with in terms of in our city, really, and the BME community, and the lack of representation for what we call it, black and minority and ethnic and refugees and travellers community who don't have any advocacy really in terms of autism.
So it's like you've been involved with the African community or the migrant community for quite a long time. In all the work that you've been doing, there has been link between you and the community, which I'll come into a minute. But talking of feminism earlier, do you consider yourself to be a feminist?
Do you know what I said to my son, who's 16? Everybody's a feminist, because everybody actually feels right to be protected. Okay. For me, I would say yes, I'm a feminist, but within reason. I don't obviously want to alienate people. Obviously, I believe in people's rights. I believe in social justice, why I'm with the Green Party. I believe in rights of women and girls, and I would protect girls with words and with policies and with everything I have. But also, let's not forget that within feminism, even some of the women alienate each other. And who's to say that men are not feminist as well?
So tell me, who is a feminist, and how is an African woman feminist? Like, what I meant is, like, we know we've got the global or the Western feminism, which is different, but being black and being a female from Africa, you know, that comes into a different perspective. So talk me through you in particular, you know, as an African, as a black person, as a female, you know, where do you consider your feminism?
I tick a lot of boxes in that sense. I'm a black Muslim African woman, and then I do have that. I don't see that as a burden. Okay. There's a part of that actually says a black woman, Muslim woman, African woman, and actually I'm a disabled woman. Okay. So in all of that, we have to add the women part of it. So that's the bit that stands out, perhaps. And when I'm tackling issues, if I'm talking about, I'll give you an example of the kind of feminism that I have, or the work that I've done that was more of it was about the rights of women rather than just really talking about what and how we should be dealing with things. When I first got my first job was to advocate for asylum seekers. So I was a caseworker, immigration caseworker for solicitors' firm. And myself and a few other ladies, one of them being an adjudicator, a judge for immigration, who used to come and support us. We developed women-only applications where if a family come to us and there's an adult woman, mother, grandmother, daughter, or sister or auntie in that family unit, they should all have their own. They should have their own claim, basically, because why should they actually be just behind the men and claiming? So we're supporting women to kind of say, well, you are your own individual, and you can actually apply for asylum in this country instead of just being on your husband's papers or your brother's papers or your dad's papers. There are ways that you can actually exercise your feminism in supporting women. Another example is when I was doing my research on FGM, I was young and I was angry, I suppose, about who used to talk about this. Why would a Western non-African woman, and I'm not talking about race here, I'm talking about in terms of not being African, what gives me the right to talk about FGM when I can empower and support women in Africa and Asia who are suffering in, or oppressed in traditional things that mean nothing really. So there's that kind of feminism in me as well, to actually empower and support, but not impose my Western views if it's not welcomed. So
having mentioned all the boxes that you ticked earlier, has there ever been a time when some of these boxes that you ticked came in as an advantage or disadvantage to what you do?
Advantage, perhaps. and sometimes disadvantage. I mean, I can sit here and talk about race issues, and obviously people have been racist, and there were racist incidents across that happened to me. So that's no, it's not a disadvantage, but that's the negative kind of views people get.
No, I mean, like sometimes in terms of job applications, or you know.
Oh, you know what? I always had this thing where I thought, well, maybe I was refused the job because of my name. You know, that kind of that comes as well. But no, I don't. I thought sometimes I did think about maybe my disability, you know, like saying I am disabled might actually meant that I've been discriminated against. But unless you actually have that concrete evidence, when you call them and say, why have you not been, you know. But
which I guess they're not going to admit.
Of course not. Of course not. You know, our equality is, you know, brilliant. But it does actually come more of an advantage for me. I use it to my advantage rather than think about the disadvantage of my
No problem.
ticks.
I'll leave that as you've mentioned it.
Yeah.
So moving on. So being the first African female councillor in this city, which is the first city of sanctuary as well in the UK.
Absolutely.
So what's your relationship with the African community or the Somalian community in general?
I was, the African community, my relationship with the African community is, I've been here 14 years. And what I can see is that there's a growing number of African community coming on board and moving to Sheffield, which is nice. It makes me really happy. I gave, a few years ago, 2007, there were, the British Council brought, the Gateway program brought people from the DAP refugee camp, and I was asked to speak about it and kind of speak to them about issues of how to support them, how to support this community and how to welcome them. And at the time I was like, well, you could just say hello and just, you know, support them. But it was more of a cultural appropriate, you know, what traditional stuff should we not do with them. And it wasn't about the food, what food do we give, but it's also, it was nice.
How to interact with them.
Yeah, it was nice to actually be identified as an African leader to kind of, or African, you know, person in that who could give a talk about the issues that might face them, including the weather. And then a few years later, I was
Excuse me. Excuse me.
I was invited to Huddersfield, where there's another group.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
That's
where another group have been taken to, part of that group, and then they were also from another country in Africa. And it was really quite interesting to kind of see also the raw African traditional dances, but at the same time be there to support them. So I would love to have a lot more, you know, involvement with the African community and with the Somali community specifically. I live in an area where there's a lot of Somali community members. And they've been supportive to me in terms of, I know I can actually just tap into somebody in terms of any advice to do with the community, or if they can support me, even childcare. They're brilliant.
Okay. So talking of that though, so we us as Africans, because I believe now many people will see you as a role model, and you as well, prior to you being where you are today, you must have had some people who you looked at as a role model, or you must have had some inspiring stories that inspired you to be where you are today. So for people like us, or for other people like who are Africans living in the UK in general, or in Sheffield in general, what kind of advice can you give to them to say, look, if I can do it, you can do it? So how can they get about, or how can they start to build a profile, be it political or anything that they want to do in the future?
First thing I would say is believe in yourself, that you could get involved in something that could lead you to what you want to do. Believing in yourself doesn't just come easy. It comes with support. So don't refuse any support and ask for support. In terms of the young people, I would love to say to them that you can do what you desire to do with the support of, I'm always happy to support people. So seek out to those who really are supportive, those who would listen, those who would look at your CV, those who would say, if you want to be a politician, get involved in campaigns and get involved in trying to bring change. If you want to do media stuff, you know, pointing them to the right direction. I think is what I would do. The other thing is, as I'm coming back to education again, we don't do enough in the schools to inspire young people. So that's where it should start, really. We should start inspiring young people. And in terms of the African young people living in Sheffield, we need to get them involved in things that obviously might be not just the traditional stuff or cultural stuff, but also in the city that they're living in. What can they get involved with? What can they do? If you don't go to university and you're not very good at academia, then there are other activities that we can support them with, and we need to, I would say, get involved in things. Even volunteering gives you so much. It gives you the satisfaction that you did something yourself without being paid for, and you supported someone. But also listen to the advice within as well. If something is bad for you, then obviously it's not what would inspire you. And also, I would say, to the young men, I would say, of the African descent in Sheffield, I would say ask questions and go to university and ask about who's teaching. We don't know how many African people teaching at the university. So kind of do a little bit of search and find out who you want to actually inspire you or support you or mentor you. And also get involved in activities to do with Black History Month.
It's quite good, like you mentioned, but we're not going to go into this today. I just thought to mention it because you mentioned volunteering, which is quite good. But sometimes as well, we in the African community, as you will know, most of us, mom and dad, are working long hours, and there is no one to support you, you know. And sometimes you coming to volunteer, you know, 2-3 days a week has got, you know, you're not getting paid. You've got to pay your own bus pass, you know, or have your own lunch, or like, you know, certain things that you cannot afford, you know, and there is not enough support there. And most of the time, our African families, we're only looking at success if someone becomes a doctor, you know, and that kind of thing, which we need to change in different mentality. But that's for a different topic on another day. You're originally from Somalia. You came to this country when you were young. So do you ever go back? And I know that you are originally from the place called the Somaliland section, which I guess has been looking to be an independent country from Somalia itself. So, you know, how do you look at the African politics?
I'm from Somalia. When you live in the diaspora, you're a Somali ethnic. So basically, Somalia is where you come from. I was born in Somaliland. I was born in Hargeisa. And
so do you support the idea for independence?
I do, actually. I do support Somaliland independence.
What happened to the word united we stand, divided we fall?
Well, we can still stand united. The reason I say I support is that for the last 27 years it's been very safe and very peaceful to go back to. And not only Somaliland-born people go to Somaliland. Actually, all the other Somalis go to Somaliland as well and have businesses. And last time I was there was 2016 with my son.
Okay, that's 2 years ago.
Yeah. And so, yes, I do go back. But equally, if I was...
how are you received in the country when you get there, knowing that you left that country when you were young, now you've come back as a woman, bringing your own son who is, I don't know how old?
That one is 11, but the older one is 16, so even more shocking for them. But it's... how I'm received is that a lot of diaspora people go back. A lot of Somalis go back to Somalia overall, the greater Somalia, you know, and Somaliland and Djibouti and Kenya. So quite a lot of Somalis go back because, as you know, Somalia was divided to 5, and that's the 2 that got together when the colonials left, kind of separated. So those are the 2, Republic of Somalia used to be now Somaliland, and Republic of Federation of Somalia, Federal Somalia. The idea when you go back is really quite, in the beginning, was quite surreal because for me, I left as a child, and when I went back 11 years later, asking my family some of my friends' names was quite shocking because they knew those children, you know, died or are missing in the war. And it was difficult in the first years of me going back. And it doesn't get any better because you know that if you stayed, you might have either died or lost or, you know, basically injured. And at the same time, you kind of feel guilty that when the children you went to school with are no longer, some of them are no longer there, no one's talking about them, because obviously they don't want to upset you. So a lot of the Somaliland, born Somaliland people who have experienced the war or lost families in the war do feel quite adamant that Somaliland should separate.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Khartoum, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
And it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
And to the viewers, thank you for watching. Until next week, it's Baile Jallow, and it was African Voices, and see you next week.